Good day to all of you, and welcome to the Regional Conference Reconciliation and Dealing with the Past in the Western Balkans, which has been organized by the Youth Initiative for Human Rights within the project No Impunity for the Past, which has been funded by the EU. And I would first of all like to greet my today's panelists. And due to the political circumstances, Parliament Speaker Bečić could not attend the conference as was announced, but it is our pleasure to be able to have with us a Vice President of the Parliament of Montenegro, Branka Bošnjak, who is always in this anti-war and pro-European positions. I would also like to welcome Head of EU Delegation to Montenegro, Her Excellency Ana Kristina Popa, Mr. Serge Bramertz, who will be joining us online. This is the Chief Prosecutor of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunal, and Mr. Milan Radovic, Program Director of Civic Alliance. Of course, I would like to greet all of the other panelists from the country and from the region, media representatives and other guests. For starters, I would like to ask Mrs. Bošnjak to address us. Mrs. Bošnjak, you have the floor. Thank you. It is truly my honor and pleasure to be able to talk to you today on this topic, because I believe this conference is very important, even though I had hoped that, facing the past and this sort of subject matter should have been over a long time ago. Unfortunately, this is not the case, because 30 years later, all of these issues are still topical. And hopefully this conference will contribute to us moving forward and jointly facing the fact that we do need to confront the past and that we need reconciliation in these areas, especially since all of the countries are aspiring towards EU accession. And if this is a goal for all of us, then we need to move forward and we need to have a different take on these topics. It is very important, and this is something that was within the public eye lately. This is the resolution that has been adopted by the Parliament of Montenegro, and I also believe that this resolution is a step forward, because it contains all of the things that were sort of painful for some peoples in Montenegro, because it has a provision which says that no people, no nation can be deemed labeled genocide. It's as having committed genocide. It's individuals that commit genocide. The problem is that a lot of individuals were not held liable. Justice was, let's say, slow. And I believe it was selective in a way. And selective justice is basically the greatest injustice. And this is something that pains us and that creates bigger problems for us. And this is something that impedes us from moving forward, because you always have those individuals who have a different take on new things. But we, as a state, need to take this step ahead. And I'm really so happy to see this as a step forward. Although, to be honest, I believe that the very initiative, when it was launched in the Parliament of Montenegro, this wasn't really an initiative that was meant to lead to reconciliation. This was basically spurred by the need to renew all of these stories. But the way it was adopted, this will definitely be a step ahead. What we need to do in Montenegro, and what I will try to do, is to clean up our own backyard, so to say. There are lots of things, there are lots of crimes that haven't been resolved. And I'm sure that this will be the right step ahead, and that this should not have a maturity date, so to say. But, years go by, some witnesses might not be alive any longer. So for this reason, it is so important to move this ahead. What I believe is that we need an efficient criminal justice. So the liability for all of those who are culprits of war crimes, and that we also need a political justice in a way. I also want us to adopt the law on lustration, because today on the public scene, we still have some of those who were warmongers back in the 90s. And now they're actually at some senior posts. And for that reason, it's important for the law on lustration, which is, a sensible issue, especially for our small environment. But we still do need it in some form. We also need compensation justice, because We need to, in a way, provide a compensation for material damages to families. They need to have this sort of satisfaction. And we also need to have restorative justice, because I believe that we need to um, have these monuments or memorial centers at all those places where innocent people were killed in the course of 90s. I believe that we are obliged to do so as the state, and hopefully I believe that the majority of Montenegro hopefully agrees with all of this, and that we are ready to confront the past and have reconciliation in a peaceful manner. And although Montenegro was not so directly involved in in these war situations in the 90s, it did to some extent, but not as much as some of the regional countries. But we there were deportations of Bosniak people, and there were, of course, people even in such situations who were, the voice of a conscience. There was the Bukovica, the Kaluđerski Laz, the Orlov Let. So it all remains sort of enigmatic and unresolved. So for all of these, we need to have a resolution if we, intend to move forward justly. Because if there is selective justice, where only one side will be, labeled as culprit for certain crimes and the other ones are not held liable, then it's not really justice. But I also believe that this shift of government, no matter how hard things are, after 30 years, it's a difficult political situation, but I believe it is, a healthy thing to have all this, because some people who believe that they were untouchable before, now they are touchable by the institutions of the system. And hopefully system institutions will be, fully professional and independent, and that they will be doing everything in accordance with the law. And this is something that's very important for us. And I'm looking forward to today's conference, and hopefully this is a great step ahead, even though I wanted to wrap up this story in a nice way. Of course, it's questionable how nice it can be given the topic. Hopefully the satisfaction will be provided to victims and their families. But and of course, this is a great step ahead. And also thanks to the NGO sector, which I will dare say was even much more active than state institutions when it comes to this subject matter. And state institutions do need to take over this whole thing, because once they do, this whole thing will be wrapped up. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Bosniak. And of course, it is we're so glad and so happy to be assisted in this program by the Parliament of Montenegro. Now, I would like to ask Her Excellency Ana Cristina Popa, head of the EU delegation to Montenegro, to take the floor. Mrs. Popa, you may have the floor. Thank you, Mrs. Poppa, and Youth Initiative for Human Rights is so thankful for your support. As we have announced, we will be hearing through an online link from Mr. Serge Brammertz, Chief Prosecutor of the International Crime Tribunal, and we would ask him to take the floor. Mr. Brammertz, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear and see me. First of all, congratulations for organizing this important event, and my apologies for not being there in person. I'm traveling again back tomorrow to our other office in East Africa, where we are still having a number of fugitives at large, where we have a number of commitments. So my apologies for not being with you, but it doesn't mean that I'm not very grateful for the opportunity to speak. And as I said, I want to underline the importance of this event. You have seen only 2 weeks ago when we had the life sentence confirmed against Mladic, how important this entire issue still is, even 25 years later. We had the survivors here, many victims, the mothers of Srebrenica, and we could really see that for survivors and for victims, those are not events from the past. Those are events which are still in the center of their lives. That's why we are always pleased as a prosecution office to support initiatives like your conference to really make sure that attention is still given to accountability in the region. When we had more than 100 journalists in The Hague asking 1,000 questions about different cases, and many tried to give the impression that with the Mladic decision, it was somehow the end. And we made it very, very clear, in every single discussion that in fact, it is one chapter of international criminal justice which is ending, but that the issue of accountability will have to continue for many, many years to come, but that there is a much stronger burden on the shoulders of national authorities. I had yesterday, we had the visit of the workers' prosecutor from Belgrade, where of course many cases still need to be prosecuted. I had a few weeks ago my regular video conference with the chief prosecutor, state prosecutor in Sarajevo, where there are in Sarajevo alone more than so-called 400 complex cases in relation to almost 4,000 suspects to be investigated and prosecuted. Already a few comments were made in relation to Montenegro, and I'm very pleased that, of course, the Parliament and the European Commission is very much associated to your projects, because Montenegro needs, obviously, external partners to address those issues. And it was mentioned before, one cannot really say that the addressing war crimes committed by citizens from Montenegro has really been very successful in the past, which is one of the reasons why my office engaged more intensively with the colleague prosecutor in Montenegro to help setting up an assistance program. Assistance program in relation to transfer of evidence, in relation to training, and in relation to access to our important databases. I signed in February 19 memorandum of understanding with a special state prosecutor in order to allow direct access to our information collections. It was already mentioned, in November 20, we transferred a quite important case file. It was already mentioned, with the names of more than 15 suspects in relation to mainly massive sexual violence, including sexual slavery, rape, torture, forced prostitution, human trafficking for sexual exploitation. It is very important. Those are very important cases. Those are not easy cases to investigate and prosecute. We know it will be an important challenge for our colleagues prosecutors. It will not necessarily be easy to convince again victims and witnesses to come forward to testify again and again. We all know the trauma is coming with this. Just to say that those cases are extremely important, but it will not be easy. That's why my office will provide all support necessary. But it also means that additional support will be needed in the prosecution office, because I remember when I visited, I could see that there are very few staff members dealing with those cases. So obviously more human resources need to be dedicated to this specific issue. We have seen that the current legislation doesn't allow direct use of evidence in court proceedings. You probably know that in Serbia and Croatia, in Bosnia, national legislation was changed to admit evidence which has been used before the ISTI directly in court, national court proceedings. We really think that this is an important aspect to be looked at. Regional cooperation was already mentioned. It is today one of the big challenges. We cannot say that regional cooperation is functioning the way it should. One of the main problems, as we all know, being that hundreds of perpetrators responsible for crimes committed in one country found refuge in the neighbor country. And with the absence of extradition agreements, many have found safe haven just a few kilometers away from the places where massive crimes were committed. There's a situation which is very unacceptable. That's why my office is very much encouraging prosecutors to open investigations at the places where the alleged perpetrators are hiding. We are asking Croatia and Serbia really to do more in this regard, and we see some progress in this regard. We have seen that today it's about reconciliation and dealing with the past, and this is definitely, if you would ask me what is the most disappointing after having been in this job for the last 13 years, is really to see that the glorification of war criminals, the denial of genocide, inviting convicted war criminals to political events, making ministries available to distribute biographies of convicted war criminals. It's absolutely an unacceptable situation, which is totally going in the wrong direction. I've said it at our speech to the Security Council 2 weeks ago. It's going in the wrong direction. Stronger reactions are absolutely needed. And again, when we had the decision in Mladic, I got so often this question, are you really sure that you are contributing to reconciliation? Is it not so that all those cases in The Hague achieve the opposite? Because every time a decision is coming out in The Hague, one group is happy, another group is very unhappy, and the tensions are coming up again. And the answer we are always saying is, look, prosecutions, accountability, convictions by themselves are not leading to reconciliation. Reconciliation has to come from within a society, from the victims' groups, from the perpetrators' groups. And you need responsible politicians to promote reconciliation, which is one of the biggest challenges we see today. But what is crystal clear for me is that if there's no accountability, if those who are responsible for the crimes committed in the past are not prosecuted for their responsibility, if there is no acceptance of the truth of the past about responsibilities, then I don't think that reconciliation has a chance. I really think that you need to agree together on your past in order to move forward together. And accountability is, in my eyes, really a precondition to give reconciliation a chance. That's why I think it's so important that for many years to come, prosecution offices in the region, with our support, will have a lot of work to do, including in Montenegro, because as I said, there have been only very few cases prosecuted, mainly unsuccessfully for a number of different reasons. We intend really to help our colleagues to work on the cases we transferred, and we really hope that in the interest of justice and in the interest of victims, this will be successful. To end, I've of course followed very closely all the debate around the resolution. I think it's an excellent resolution, which is addressing the main issues. The issues of recognizing the victims and recognizing the existence of the genocide, but making it so clear that it's about individual criminal responsibility. This is this issue I'm explaining every single time to every single journalist who wants to listen to us, to say this is not against any country, this is not against any nation, this is in relation to individual criminal responsibility. And I really would want to see more countries having the courage to take those kind of resolutions. I know that this is always happening in a very complex and difficult political context, but I really want to congratulate the Parliament for having taken this step, which is not a hostile act against anyone else, any country, any government, but it is giving what the victims deserve, the recognition of the suffering and the crimes they went through, and calling it genocide, which has been in a number of final decisions been recognized as such by the ICTY, now by the mechanism and by the International Court of Justice. I want to conclude by again congratulating all of you for being together. I know that probably everyone at your conference is already someone who is a believer in international criminal justice, who is convinced. We are following for many years what the Youth Initiative for Human Rights is doing. It's an excellent organization, and seeing what youth organizations, despite a lot of political oppositions, are doing in all the countries of former Yugoslavia is really, really important. So I will be one of your supporters also in the future, and if there are other initiatives where I can be helpful, please let me know. Again, to the Parliament, thank you for a courageous but necessary decision. And of course, the European institutions are our partners for many, many years. We are also receiving support from the European Union. So I think altogether, we will be successful in fighting for more justice for more weak victims. So thank you very much, and good luck with your conference.
Thank you, Mr. Brammertz, for your speech and for the kind words about our conference. And thank you for being with us and for contributing to the high quality of this conference. And now we will hear from Mr. Milan Radovic, the Program Director of Civic Alliance. Mr. Radovic, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mina. At the very beginning, let me greet Ms. Bosniak, Ms. Popa, Mr. Brammertz, and hello to everyone. I wish to convey to you my sincere regards, especially to our friends from the region who, despite the COVID situation, are here with us today. And also let me at the very beginning say that I am pleased with seeing so many guests and participants today in this conference, because in Montenegro, in the past, whenever this topic was brought up, we didn't have that many people, and I would say that the number actually rarely went above 15 or 20 people. So today we are actually a bit surprised, positively surprised by the number of people attending, and we did not expect so many people. And so before the beginning of the conference, we had to put in new chairs, additional chairs, and I'm pleased for that. And I wish to believe that today's work will be a new beginning of facing the past in Montenegro, given that, given the process so far. At the very beginning, let me say something about the conference. This is the final conference. Before that, we had mainly trainings and informing the youth about what was going on in the 90s. And based on what we knew before the start of the project, through different means of communication with the young people, and what we learned during the implementation of the project tells us that young people mainly are not aware of what was going on back in the 90s in the region. Given what the institutions did, and given that there are no information about war crimes in the textbooks and schools, and given that it is mainly NGOs who are insisting on these topics, we can conclude, it seems to me, that what we have in Montenegro is not facing the past, but the process of forgetting the war past. On top of the youth education, we also worked with different institutions. We visited Dubrovnik, where the representatives of the political parties, institutions, NGOs, and the media had a chance to talk to people, to their counterparts and colleagues on the other side, and to hear what really happened from them. And this is, I believe, an excellent way of learning about what really happened in Dubrovnik. We also had local discussions together with the local assemblies and the national councils and the local NGOs. We've launched discussions and we talked with the local population to see how much they know. Unfortunately, the panel discussions were not that popular and did not attract that many participants, but thanks to the media, I hope the messages sent did manage to reach a greater number of people. We also had organized debates in the local public broadcasters with local decision makers and our colleagues from the NGO sector, the media, and the citizens who expressed their views and additionally informed the local population about numerous crimes in former Yugoslavia and Montenegro. The most important outcome of this project is opening the Information Documentation Center here in Podgorica. This is the first such development, and luckily there is enough experience with such a concept in the region, and this is something that should attract all the future investigators, prosecutors, lawyers, young people, primarily students of law, so that they come to the center and to investigate the extensive references and literature we managed to collect thanks to our friends. I also wish to say who our partners were on the project. This is, first of all, NGO Bukovica from Pljevlja, NGO Youth Initiative for Human Rights from Serbia, NGO Documents from Croatia, the Law School of the University of Montenegro, and the Parliament of Montenegro. I really wish to thank all of them for the fruitful cooperation, for the sincere and open relationship, and for their great contribution to the implementation of this project in a high quality manner. Also, we couldn't have done this without the support of the colleagues from the European Union and the digital society and media institutions, and I wish to thank them as well. When we talk about facing the past in Montenegro, regardless of the fact that it's been decades since these events, and regardless of the fact that the biggest culprits have been sanctioned, we still haven't reached full justice. I agree with Ms. Bosniak that the crucial element is criminal justice. And until we have criminal justice, the victims and their family members will still be waiting for justice. And it will be increasingly difficult to reach justice because it's been 30 years since some crimes. the situation in Montenegro and the region is not good in Montenegro and the region. The relations between the countries of the region are not good. The relations between the nations are not good. And we are far from reconciliation, I would say. We could see how turbulent the adoption of the declaration on Srebrenica was. And we could see through many other examples where the past was discussed. We could see that people disagree very much over that. There are many negative debates. And I would say that there are still those people who are not willing to renounce the criminals. They are, on the contrary, willing to glorify them, as Mr. Bramertz was saying. And what's crucial for reconciliation is for the political elites and spiritual elites leading the people in Montenegro and the region. It's important for them to do it first. It's important for those leaders to renounce the criminals, because there are two sides here. There are victims, there are criminals. And it's clear, perfectly clear, that these are the only sides we can choose between. Regional cooperation is very important, and thanks to Ms. Popa for indicating this. And this is why I am pleased that today we have our friends from the region who are dealing with these topics. And today, not only in Montenegro, but also in the region, there are many war criminals at large. The young people are supporting them. Because of their treatment of the war criminals, the Speaker of the Parliament and his deputy are criticized in the media and social networks. And I would say that those who order such messages to be spread receive amnesty and support. The text box, as I was saying, do not include any information on these events. And as a paradox, today we have a situation that war criminals even actually benefit from their crimes. And I will complete this address by saying that we are all accountable. I'm pleased again that the conference is attended with this number of people, and I hope we will be able to change the situation for the better, and that we will be able to head towards reconciliation, because today's situation is very dangerous. It's dangerous for the future, and we need a new approach. We need new people. And again, I'm going back to the issue of criminal liability. It's crucial, and in the coming period, we also need to prosecute those responsible for the crimes and those responsible for not taking any action to prevent such crimes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Radovic. And now let me say something else. One of the most important results of the project No Impunity for the Past is the opening of the Information Documentation Center, dealing with the collection and archiving of all the available materials about war crimes in the territory of Montenegro and war crimes for which Montenegro is responsible. On the 5th of October 2020, the center was opened by the Speaker of the Parliament, Mr. Aleksa Bečić, and by Ms. Popa. The Parliament of Montenegro supported this center by signing a memorandum of understanding, and the project and the agreement envisages that the center will be assumed by the Parliament of Montenegro. So now I would invite Mr. Radovic and Ms. Bosniak to officially transfer the keys for the Information and Documentation Center to the Parliament of Montenegro.
So thank you once again, and hopefully this center will last a long, long time. And hopefully it will contribute to reconciliation to the future, to all of us as encumbered by the past. Once again, thank you to my panelists and of course, Mr. Bramertz, who joined us online. And now I would like to ask my colleague Zoran Vujicic to join me here together with his panelists so that we can start the next panel. So we're moving on. Our next topic is how to overcome shortcomings in judiciary in terms of fight against impunity for war crimes. It's my honor and pleasure to have here with me on this panel people who will adequately respond to this issue, to this topic. So I would like to greet, first of all, Mr. Avdo Avdic, who's a journalist of Istraga.ba web portal, Mrs. Drita Haidari, war crimes prosecutor at the Special Prosecutor's Office of Kosovo, Mr. Ivan Jovanovic, Regional War Crimes Project, which is a UNDP project, and Mrs. Valentina Pavlicic, who is representative of Montenegro before European Court of Human Rights. I will, first of all, start this panel with Mr. Avdo Avdic, And a sentence of his, which I liked so much, which is that selective justice is actually making culprits into victims. And this is something that caught my attention, because in the Balkans, this is a sort of a pattern of behavior of, heads of prosecutorial instances, whereby we're not reaching the thing that we're supposed to reach, which is the fact where true culprits, all of the true culprits will be, finally sanctioned. So for this reason, I would like to ask you, because, the focus of your line of work, in your work, you are focused on prosecutorial instances in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And do you believe that they have credibility to prosecute war crimes, with the current prosecutors and judges? Good day to all of you. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's no single institution that has credibility. And I'm happy that Ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina is here, and he knows this just like I do. Unfortunately, out of all institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, out of those incredible ones, the most incredible one that lacks credibility is prosecutor's office. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, basically prosecution is the source of legal uncertainty. I could list you, dozens or hundreds of cases of how Bosnia and Herzegovina judicial institutions operate when it comes to corruption and war crimes. But since this is the topic that we're dealing, the war crimes, I will focus on some of the examples that have to do with war crimes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You all are aware the terror that Sarajevo has been subjected to. In Sarajevo, thousands of children were killed, and the prosecutor's office of Bosnia and Herzegovina, from those wars up until today, or since their establishment in 2003 up until today, did not launch a single indictment for grenading the Sarajevo or for sniper shootings in Sarajevo. At the same time, the prosecutor's office of Sarajevo has launched an indictment for eliciting the spread of fear in Kalinovic, which is the birthplace of Ratko Mladic. So I'm not even asking whether General Ramić Dreković was supposed to be indicted or not. If there were victims, civilian victims in Kalinovic, yes, he should have been indicted if he was a culprit, and if there is grounds for suspicion that he was guilty. But it's illogical for Kalinovic, where in the course of war, 50 or so grenades were used in Kalinovic. You have indictment against this general of the army of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but you have no indictment for grenading or sniper shooting in Sarajevo. So you cannot really compare the number of victims. Of course, to each person, their victim is the highest sort of pain, but you have different generals who have been receiving a life imprisonment for grenading Sarajevo. And yes, it's a chain of command, and they were culprits for that. And the judiciary of Bosnia and Herzegovina did not launch an indictment against them. And recently, the colleague from France has published some of the footages of snipers and sniper shooters who were bragging about shooting civilians in the head in Sarajevo. And I went down and I tracked down this sniper shooter, who's actually now a waiter in the east part of Sarajevo. With no problem, I did some legal recording of this conversation with him. And when I said that, they said, we have, set up a case. And this is the response of this prosecutorial office in Sarajevo. They said, we set up this case. Setting up a case is basically having this case file, A4 format, just setting up a particular case file, nothing more than that. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, you have such cases, the distinction between Sarajevo and Kalinovic. On the other hand, OSCE expert Jana Corner has mentioned in her work report about Bosnia and Herzegovina prosecutor's office for the war crimes for Konjic. In Konjic, the prosecutorial office in Bosnia and Herzegovina managed to indict 2 persons, two different individuals, that they have actually at the same time have been commanders of a unit to whom they have ordered to commit war crimes. So these two persons were at the same time commanders of this unit that committed these crimes. And this is now before the court in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I believe they will be acquitted. And based on OSCE data for 2018, out of 44 persons indicted for war crimes, only 17 have been, prosecuted and received a guilty verdict. There are a lot of other people who understand much better what the judiciary is, what it means to properly prosecute. But if you have less than 50% of the guilty verdicts, then it means that you didn't do your job well as a prosecutor. And this is without going into the let's say the structure of those who have been indicted. And I'm so glad to have Emir Suljagic here in the next panel, and he might be able to say a thing or two about this. That prosecutor's office in Bosnia and Herzegovina is changing the character of the wars in Bosnia and Herzegovina, of the war in Herzegovina. So you have these 6 generals who have been found guilty of war crimes, and the prosecutor's office in Bosnia and Herzegovina, before this was actually a prosecution in The Hague. Before that, they indicted Bosnia and Herzegovina soldiers which were actually going into the war against HVO, and there were different those who all corpus from Cikotic from Mlađe, and there was a first instance decision for the war of criminal offense in association with other entities. So these are representatives of Bosnia and Herzegovina army. And this is how it happens in the judiciary. And the appellate court has actually reinstated this previous verdict and has requalified them as crimes against humanity. And if you're trying at the territory of this associated war offense to incorporate this qualification in some other cases so that you could reduce the Hague Tribunal's decision, then it's clear that these are political processes. The chief prosecutor, Gordana Tadic, was the head of the war crimes department. All of these things were done in her term of office. So you have this absolute legal uncertainty now when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina war crimes. If you have some concrete questions, I can go back to that, so I wouldn't take up too much time. But of course, I can mention here dozens of different examples later on. Yes, and on that note, I've seen that some judges who are now and there were judges who have been releasing these acquittal decisions are still now, holding these senior judicial positions. And this is not just the case for Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina. It goes further. Mrs. Haidari, if we know that in late 2018, we've had around 900 cases of war crimes and 2,000 of cases about missing persons, do you think that with the adoption of the strategy, can be helpful, because this is a really high figure of cases that need to be resolved? And is it a key to ensuring certain results, to ensuring the protection of witnesses? Is that where the key lies? Thank you so much, and greetings to all of you present here. Since I'm very well familiar with the local language, I would like to show my respect here. And of course, I might even be clear in this respect, and sending out a clearer messages message that I mean to send from this conference. For those who do not know this, I would like to point out that war crimes after the completion of war in Kosovo were within the competence of the UNMIK mission, so they were exclusively under the competence of international judges and international prosecutors. Once UNMIK completed its mission, these cases were handed over to a different rule of law mission in Kosovo, ULEX, and ULEX up until the end of 2018, de jure and de facto was competent over the prosecution of war crimes. This means that Kosovo, unlike some other countries in the region, was not allowed to set up a prosecutor's office and a court for war crimes, because, as I said, this was within the exclusive competence of the international judges and prosecutors. So that we, the domestic judges and prosecutors, we would have competences over cases only in late 2018. So the result is 900 of case files, 900 of war crimes cases, and around 2,000 cases of missing persons. Of course, in such a situation, we had to take a strategic approach to resolving this huge workload. In a strategic document, which is entitled Strategy for War Crimes, we have set up the current state of play, so we wouldn't be blamed at some point in the future, blamed along the lines why some of the judges and prosecutors, like the journalist from Bosnia just did, they are guilty for not having prosecuted this case for any reason. So we have actually presented the state of play, and we have envisaged further activities aimed at prosecuting and overcoming the current state of play. One of the elements is the one that you've mentioned, so witness protection. Although I have to say that once you're in a situation to prosecute a case after 20 years have lapsed, it is difficult to conduct investigation after an event, even if it took place quite recently, let alone after 20 years have passed, where witness might be dead or got old, and perpetrators got old or died. And a lot of things are forgotten, a lot of details are forgotten in the meantime. And when a lot of perpetrators are actually outside of Kosovo. And when I say this, I'm primarily referring to representatives of military and paramilitary and police forces of Serbia. They're not in Kosovo. So even when we see the investigation through and we collect evidence, we do not reach perpetrators. And then we have to suspend the investigation. Of course, we ask the court to issue all of those legal instruments, such as international warrant and so on. And then we wait. We wait whether a perpetrator will be caught. So I've come to this key moment, which is international legal protection. In order for this international legal protection to be set up, and in order for us to prosecute war crimes, something that I had to face as a first step when these trials against war crimes are needed, it was actually the need to change awareness, moral policy, and politics, so that these cases would be prosecuted properly, and so that justice and satisfaction for victims would be ensured, and so that perpetrators would be and would be also sanctioned and brought before justice. We have a situation where war criminals are hiding, defending themselves, and actually they're being hidden. They are being defended by other people, and they're being promoted or glorified. And this is something, of course, that's immoral and against the law. And all of us who prosecute war crimes, we're all facing this model where basically they are being proclaimed heroes. And this is how this lack of success happened in Bosnia in prosecuting of war crimes. And the same goes for Kosovo and elsewhere. So we need to change our awareness. We're talking about facing the past. And we cannot face the past if we don't say what actually happened, how it happened. Trust me, this huge number of cases, I mean, each case is a story in itself. And there's not a single case that happens that, I wrap up the case file without me wondering, why did this take place? How could one person do this to another? So we've come to international legal cooperation. War crimes, and we all know this, they are a violation not just of domestic legislation, but actually a violation of the international law, of international humanitarian law. And I always claim that war crimes prosecution is not only a thing to be done by a single country. So if I talk about Kosovo, this cannot only be done by Kosovo. This is a problem of the international community. And I believe that the international community needs to ensure to establish cooperation between countries in order to prosecute war crimes and not to allow that these criminals are being hidden and being promoted and proclaimed as heroes. For example, Kosovo doesn't have a single reciprocal cooperation with Serbia, not a single one. And the majority of war crimes happen there. I believe that is international legal cooperation and prosecution of war crimes is the bridge that will be, linking us with the past, which is very painful and full of suffering, with a future that will be acceptable to all. I'd like to wrap up now for the time being with a sentence that you've just reiterated, and that silence is a crime also. Yeah, it might be from some of my previous interviews, yes. So that's what I would like to conclude with. Mr. Jovanovic, UNDP has implemented lots of trainings with judges and prosecutors as per in the area of war crimes. And from your point of view, do you find that there is a desire in Serbia to resolve this issue of war crimes in Serbia? No, I'm talking from the perspective of Montenegro. To which extent are young people aware of all this? And might there be the key in, starting with education of the youngest generations and then move, forward? Because if young people do not know what was going on in the past, then some things might get forgotten. There won't be this enthusiasm and this fervor to see things through. This is something that's happening in Montenegro. Through our research and surveys, we were actually taken aback by the fact that young people, even students of the Faculty of Law, were not aware about war crimes that happened in the territory of Montenegro. Good day to all. Ivan Jovanovic, and I'm here of the UNDP on behalf of the UNDP program, and since your your first question was related to to Serbia, sorry, and this is the program also that covers Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo, and Montenegro, and we also have our colleagues from UNDP in Pristina who are handling the issues of transitional justice in Kosovo. And as of 2003, UNDP started different sorts of activities, not just trainings, as you mentioned, but we have also been doing trainings, as you mentioned. Often this contribution of the international community in prosecuting of war crimes has been done by means of trainings, and because international community would be always asking, what are the conditions you need to prosecute war crimes, and trainings are the least of our problems here. Of course, these trainings need to have continuity, because if once you train one generation of judges, prosecutors, and of course sometimes this is law enforcement representatives, witness protection unit representatives, and it seems as if you train this one generation, you stop there. There's change of generation, change of officers. They move on to different units. So you need to renew these trainings. And as is the case with Serbia, they didn't really delegate this job to the Judicial Academy so that they were ensure a continuity. There's always this initiative from the international community to make sure that these trainings are, that there's continuity to those trainings, because of course this is a very specific subject matter, and of course prosecutor Haidari knows this. These are not just classical sort of knowledge that practitioners and lecturers will be passing on. This is something that has to be really properly acquired. So it's not just about knowledge, about the level of being trained, it's about willingness to do something. And when I say willingness, this means political will and the will of those operational officers. A political will in Serbia and in region has been changing. In Serbia, it used to have this upwards trend, and in the last several years, it has been taking this downturn, this downward trend. This is the situation not just in Serbia, but in many other parts of the region. But I'm happy, I must say, to have this opportunity today to talk to at this gathering that's actually set up by an NGO, Youth Initiative for Human Rights. And this is nothing new to me, but I'm so happy to know that this sort of gathering is actually, supported by the ministry of a particular ministry of Montenegro, and also by the Vice President of Parliament of Montenegro. And they talked about the setting up of this ICD center. And it would often happen where a government of a regional country would be backing a certain NGO activity that has to do with transitional justice and facing the past. And I can only greet this. And this is something that instills hope, at least in case of Montenegro. And as for this will in Serbia and elsewhere in the region, there has been this downward trend, and there has been over time this sense of fatigue. And you could actually see this, in a lesser interest of the international community when Mladic was extradited to The Hague, and it was like, okay, so we're done now, just a couple of more years and we will this will be wrapped up, and we will be finished with that. Of course, there's no maturity date to war crimes. There's no coexistence, cohabitation in this region if we don't provide justice. Prosecuting war crimes in Serbia as of 2003 up until now is something that's underway. I've been working with judges and prosecutors as a representative of the UNDP, and I've been working with them continuously. I see that they have the will, but also there are hurdles that they are faced with, and which also have to do with will. So, for example, lack of cooperation with the police. This is a continuous problem. Sometimes it's a lack of funds, a lack of political support as well, which leads towards censorship by the state in terms of which cases you will be prosecuting. Will you be going towards higher army echelons and indicting them? Because as for war crimes in Serbia, it's often believed that it's Bosniaks, Croats and Albanians are being indicted. Actually, it's the contrary. Over 60% of those indicted are actually ethnic Serbs who are indicted against crimes against Albanians, Croats, and so forth. But normally these are just, let's say, direct perpetrators. They are not highly ranked officers. So there were not really indictments against those, in higher echelons and higher up in the hierarchy. And this is, in a way, that something that has led to this self-censorship. And as for the cooperation that is needed in order to prosecute war crimes cases in ex-Yugoslavia, just think about how difficult it is to talk about a particular case. And it's a case that even perpetrators that were indicted, witnesses, some of the witnesses or all of the witnesses are not in former Yugoslavia territory at all. So this cooperation is being advanced, and Montenegro was actually one of the biggest proponents of cooperation. In Serbia, an operational level, so prosecutors and judges were always for cooperation in Serbia as well. But there are these periods of suspension when, due to some political events or maybe sometimes lack of international support, they simply lose contact, and there is a breakage in this communication. And now, owing to UNDP, we have actually revived this cooperation, especially in certain cases and evidence, collection of certain evidence. But this is to a lesser degree as it should be, as it was in mid 2000s. And there's this unresolved issue of cooperation between prosecution of Serbia and Kosovo and their respective prosecutorial offices. There used to be ONMIK and ULEX, and now since there's practically none of that since the independence of Kosovo was proclaimed. So there is a will of the Serbian prosecutors to, cooperate with their Kosovo counterparts. And when I say Kosovo, I mean, United Nations representatives, and because. But it is important to strike this compromise and to talk about these things. And it is necessary also for other state instances to talk about this, not just the judiciary, and to find a way that will allow us to have operational cooperation in terms of exchange of evidence, extradition of those of defendants who are seeking refuge in countries where they believe that the majority of their people actually live, and these extraditions are not allowed by the current agreements, except between Serbia and Montenegro. Yes, for other crimes, yes, but for war crimes, this is actually how things are done. But instead of extradition, maybe you can talk about, delegating or handing over a case or handing over evidential material. And this is something that we have been actively working on. And I believe that the period is coming where this will be improved, because how war crimes handled in the former Yugoslavia in next 4 to 6 years, that will be it. Suspects are dying, the witnesses are as well. There's the memory of witnesses is also affected. They lose a lot. They forget a lot of the details in the meantime. And the thing you asked, about the youth. This is basically the essence of when it comes to the issue of transitional justice in the region. Prosecutor Bramertz mentioned something to that, and trials and criminal prosecution is a necessary element, but this is not enough. One day when decades ahead, when victims are no longer alive, and when this justice won't mean won't mean much to them, it will be important for young people to go back to facts. And of course, facts are determined at domestic and Hague tribunal, and this is something that needs to be talked about. NGOs are those that always had the initiative. The state would become involved to a certain extent, but normally this would be from the perspective that their majority people is the only exclusive victim in everything that's happened. Lately, we have seen the reactions to Ratko Mladic verdict, and these reactions have actually shown that things have taken a downturn when it comes to facing the past. This is something that we have been tackling a great deal through these projects, and we're not the only ones, and we can be optimistic in terms of international community, donors, embassies. The EU are thinking about these things and preparing different activities and funds for the purpose of working with young people, young historians, young lawyers, political scientists, young representatives of political parties, so as to exchange information and everything that was determined within final and enforceable court decisions, and to exchange information and pass on knowledge about what happened in the early 90s. Of course, it will take a lot of time for us to reach, and to have the same perception on what happened, but at least to come close to having a same knowledge and approach, a pretty similar perspective to what happened in the 90s. Thank you. I will now give the floor to Mrs. Valentina Pavlicic. What I would like to know, and the audience certainly, is how you perceive from the perspective of European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, what are our deficiencies, and what is it that our judiciary needs to do so as to overcome these deficiencies?
Thank you. First of all, let me greet all the panelists and participants of today's conference, and I'm really pleased to be with you and that I can share with you my views about the success of the conference. To be talking today about the war crime cases in the context of the rule of law in Montenegro is certainly a challenge, because as a society, we are at a moment where we are summing up what's been achieved or done, and we are actually setting path for the future agenda and our society. I was formerly a judge, as you know, and I had a chance to take part in the cases dealt with by the Montenegrin judiciary. And today I am a representative before the European Court, so I represent the interests of the state before the international judicial system. And this is where we have different applications that were previously dealt with by the Montenegrin court. So I have to say in this context that the standards as the European Court views them is coming from Morris versus France, which I always keep getting back to, which says that justice not only has to be distributed, but also needs to be seen as distributed. I think this is pretty much self-explanatory, and there is no need to linger on it and to try to distribute it further. But the decisions of Montenegrin courts should be clear in what's been established, what hasn't been established, and what the conclusion of the court is in this regard. the holders of judicial offices, primarily judges and prosecutors, have to be ready to make an active contribution to everything that awaits them on that path of their justice, which they are sharing. When it comes to the war crimes or the cases of war crimes, probably the public knows this. Before the court, there is the deportation court case, which is still preoccupying the Montenegrin public. And this is so for the reason that the court itself declared the case secret for many other reasons. But let me, including the fact that there is also a neighboring country which got involved as the third party in the process. So Montenegro is here in the role of a defendant against the applicants and the neighboring country. But the way Strasbourg court approaches applications with war crimes is such that the case law is fully clear and well established. What we are facing as the state representatives and as judges is, and this is the first question that the applications need to satisfy. This is the so-called actione temporis, or the question whether this type of a case or application has the possibility to be adjudicated by the European Court. For those who do not know this and who do not know the reason why this is examined, well, the reason for that is that all the countries from the region, especially Montenegro, have signed the convention, and it applies differently to different countries. As for Montenegro, it's started to be applied in 2004, and as of that moment, violations will be treated or not be treated, or applications will be examined or not examined. Now, when it comes to war crimes, the question is if this is a permanent state of affairs or something that can be regarded as actione temporis. Let me mention cases in which the court provided their views. This is the well-known Kamenica case, Kamenica versus Serbia, Abdic versus Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the court dealt with the historical moment. And for all of those cases, this is the most important element. Even when we are defending the state, when we are pointing to the facts that the national institutions brought, the representative is only obliged to present what the institutions presented at the national level. I'm not sure if Montenegrin and regional institutions applied international law well the way it is expected in those cases. Let me remind you that when the cases were first dealt with 10 or 15 years ago, the actors taking part in those investigations and trials, were they aware of all the international covenants, treaties, conventions, and all the obligations that we as the national institutions had to study, and where we had to study how they are treated before the international court and how they should be accessed before the national courts. And there is also a fact that the reports of the European Commission have a special segment dedicated to war crimes. So, to the way in which the state institutions are investigating such cases. Now, the status of the applicants applying for that type of cases before the court in Strasbourg is different compared to those who complain about the efficiency and effectiveness of investigation in some normal situations, ordinary, not related to war. And this is the reason why it is reasonable to expect the prosecution office to implement timely and transparent investigations when you have the normal criminal offenses situation. But here you have a situation where investigations start after many years and this is the approach of the Hague Tribunal and the International Court. So there is no, the level of treating the investigation is not the same as the one in normal cases, and the ineffectiveness of investigation is viewed from the perspective of the documents considered and how they are treated, and how this is what Mr. Brammertz was talking about. There is this proactive approach requirement, and after all, in the report by the international expert Maurizio Salustra, we were criticized in terms of how we approached those cases. Also, it's very important to say that we still do not have the decision again. We are still waiting for the decision of the court in the deportation case, and we will see what it will be. We, of course, presented our views that we thought were procedurally requiring such address. So how it will be treated? If it turns out that the state has violated the rights, and this is violation of Article 2 or 3 of the convention, so absolute rights, we will have the possibility potentially to repeat some procedures. This is envisaged by the Criminal Procedure Code of Montenegro and all the laws in the neighboring countries. So if the European Court finds violation of a certain right, the state, if this is necessary to establish the individual rights, the state can reopen the case. So we will see how it works out. It depends on the decision of the court, and whether we will see whether the court will, for example, deem that such a petition is, or an application is inadmissible for a series of reasons that were discussed or debated already, but we will see. What I also wish to say, however, is that in those cases that were completed before the national courts, or that were, completed those investigations, I think that we still have to consider reopening them if there are facts that were unexplored, and we need to avoid, of course, imposing sanctions on 2 occasions for the same offense or dual criminality. But of course, given the aspirations of the Montenegrin society to be a democratic and civil and open society, we need to be ready to open all of our institutions and the holders of all the offices to face the in everything they do, and to focus on the importance of our future progress. When it comes to the war crimes, again, they cannot be dealt with only by one prosecutor or by one advisor or by one judge. What we need is a state strategy, a national strategy in the prosecution office, a national strategy in the judiciary, and a priority needs to be given to that, because we cannot expect, if a criminal report was filed, that after 10 years, there is still nothing going on, and we ask for information after 10 years, and in those 10 years, we just did some sporadic investigative actions. And finally, this is where the state can be held responsible for failing to act, because the members of the injured families need to receive answers from the state institutions within a certain deadline which is acceptable for them. Thank you. And even though we are already behind with the agenda, just a couple of remarks. First of all, are there any questions from the audience to our panelists? If not, can you give us the shortest possible final message when it comes to this very important topic from the perspective of your countries and as a general message at the level of the countries of the region. But please be as brief as possible. And then we need to conclude this session. Thank you. Well, let me just refer to Ratko Mladić case. It shows the situation in all the countries of the region. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but this is a person who at the court in Bosnia and Herzegovina under the indictment of the prosecution was sentenced to 22 years, it seems to me, more than 20 years in any case, for war crimes committed in a camp near Mostar. And this is fine. The person went to serve the sentence. 12 years after this sentence, after his arrest, after his detention, 12 years later, Croatia, so the official authorities of Croatia, launched an arrest warrant against him for crimes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They asked for extradition from Bosnia. The court in Bosnia refuses this. However, the Minister of Justice of Bosnia and Herzegovina makes a decision and extradites the person from the prison in Bosnia and Herzegovina who is serving the sentence, extradites the person to Zagreb in Croatia. They organize a quick trial and sentence him to 12 years in prison, and they release him the same day because he had already served 12 years. So a member state of the European Union with its judiciary has taken part. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm entitled to have an opinion. This is a kidnapping of the war criminal from prison. The man was serving his sentence in Bosnia and Herzegovina and needed to serve 10 more years, but the Croatian judiciary used its mechanisms, transferred the person to Croatia, and he was released. Eventually, the guy was killed in Mostar. This is how it all ended, but this is how war criminals are rehabilitated, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but anyway. In Serbia, currently, there is Milisav Gavrić case. The man is present in a reality show, and there is an international search warrant for him because of genocide in Srebrenica, and he is taking part in a reality show that is broadcasted live in Serbia. So, you know, there is systemic effort to provide refuge to war criminals. So we cannot talk about reconciliation until we get those things sorted out. Well, it's really unfortunate and sad, and we really need to work on that. Anyone else with a comment or final message? If not, I would really like to thank you for your participation in this panel. And what I can say as a summary is that many things need to be done. And it seems to me that the key message of not only of the holders of judicial offices, but also of the holders of public offices is that the political will is crucial for some things to get going. So this is the moment that decides which way we will go as a country. So there needs to be a political decision to investigate those things fully so that we can proceed forward as a state. And until we do that, I'm afraid we will have many trainings, many seminars, many strategies with little specific results. This would complete our panel, and I would ask the panelists of the next panel to join us here.
I believe we may start. I think I have a very difficult position today because I have here with me 4 people who have survived some of the incredible, unsurmountable losses. And 45 minutes of time. So 45 minutes, perhaps a little longer, to tackle a topic that we have been talking about in former Yugoslavia for 25 years now, but we're basically still not sure about what it is that we're talking about. What's the essence of this? I would like to try, given the time slot that we have available, and given the identity of my interviewers, we can maybe define, let's say, set out a couple of questions, key questions, and tell them and ask them to tell us what they think. And I hope that Bakira Hasičić from Sarajevo can hear me. I can't hear you currently, but hopefully the rest can hear you. Bakira is someone I know personally. And she's one of the heroes of this activism in Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the women who's the first to topple some of the taboos and start talking about some things that some things that were not talked about in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I presume in Montenegro as well. I would like to steer this debate by myself asking our interlocutors 1 or 2 questions each and give them maybe 5 or 10 minutes each to respond to these questions, of course, to the best way they can. And my first question would be, and I would like to start with women in this panel. So Bakira and Flaka. And Flaka will be speaking in Albanian, if I was informed well, or maybe in English. In Albanian. She will be speaking in Albanian. Okay, so that's settled. So to that end, I would like to ask, well, for starters, Bakira. She's in Sarajevo, and I don't know whether she's in AC conditioned room. So as someone who has suffered these losses that just can never be made up for, what is basically the essence of all these things that we're calling reconciliation with the past that we've been talking about for 25 years? So is it all about us, stopping with the criminal prosecution or perpetrators, all of the persons who violated the law end up in jail? Or does this reconciliation encompass other things, elements of what we often refer to as transitional justice, such as monetary compensation or some other things? So I would like to therefore start with Bakira. Hopefully, Bakira, if you heard me, you are aware that we have around 45 minutes in total. And I will try to stick within this time slot. Of course, if we go a bit further than that, it won't be, a tragic thing, but still, let's try to stick to this time slot. It is very difficult to reconcile with the past when you've been victim of these different offenses. There have been rapes of women of all ethnicities. So we have collected over 6,000 statements from the survived victims. How I see facing with the past. No, it's not just criminal prosecution of these cases, it's truth and justice that's priority for us. And so that they are held liable for the crimes they've committed. But one of the biggest satisfaction is for the victims, but this is something that's very difficult to achieve after 30 years. I owe great gratitude to the Hague Tribunal. We've had great cooperation with them. But the thing is Bosnia and Herzegovina now is that there were cases such as that of Slobodan Milosevic, and of course I want to first of all praise the adoption of the resolution on Srebrenica in Montenegro, and on the other hand, Serbia has been providing refuge to war crimes, and they have dual citizenship, and they do not want to extradite them to Bosnia and Herzegovina. And lately, it's been a case that they have been given refugee to those that have been under Interpol's arrest warrants. And one of the war crime defendants has actually fled. This was for cases in Ukraine. He has actually fled to Serbia. And what pains me as a victim is the glorifying of these war criminals, denying of these final and enforceable verdicts. And I'm sometimes not too happy with the verdicts, but they are how they are, and we have to abide by them. Because there are cases you have examples of, for example, a mother of a rapist or a war criminal coming over to the woman who was violated and saying, yes, this was my son who does this, but I haven't raised him like that. He wasn't raised to be a rapist and a war criminal. And trust me, when these things happen, that's the greatest, that's the satisfaction. Witnesses die, perpetrators die. And until these things are not resolved, there won't be peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because we have amongst ourselves war criminals living in Bosnia among us. I've witnessed different, assassination threats or intimidation instances. And I even value Montenegro even more after the adoption of this resolution on Srebrenica. And, we have statements of different persons who have committed war crimes and rapings. And in my extended family, I have cases like that. And there is this war criminal living in your immediate vicinity. And the prosecution of Bosnia and Herzegovina communicated with the Hague Tribunal. And it is important to have greater sense of awareness among young people it is important for the young people, for example, to ask, for example, their father, during the war, where were you? What were you doing at the time? What did you do during those years? Because, the more we wait, it will be more late. It's something that's biologically inevitable. And there are people who committed these things and are still living in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It would be important for all of us to take part in this raising awareness part, so that, of course, we could prosecute war crimes. And there are, of course, other needs of the surviving witnesses and victims, actually, that need to be addressed. And there should never be this denial or glorifying of those who committed genocides. Apologies, the sound was very, very difficult to pick up. So just so you know, this is your interpreter speaking. This was very difficult to hear. Thank you, Bakira. So please stay with us here, just in case there are any questions. And if a debate should be stricken up at some point, I must admit, I knew about all of my other interlocutors, who they are and what they do, and I didn't really learn a great deal about my interlocutor from Kosovo, but and of course I will give you the floor, and I would also like to hear your response to this question that I've asked, which is the essential actually question. From the standpoint of victims, of those who are survivors, what should actually this facing of reconciliation mean, basically? Sorry, just waiting for interpretation from the Albanian booth. Ne dobijamo relay.
Ovdje dobijaš.
Okay. Onda se ne čuje ništa.
Mora da čujem.
Ne. Aha. My father, Baliu, wanted to choose a different name for his youngest daughter. When I was born, he gave me the name Fleka, which means fire, because Kosovo was actually caught in this old fire. So he wanted to basically give me name Ilona, but he opted for Fleka, so as to symbolize the situation that Kosovo was in. And this is basically a reminder of what Kosovo has gone through during the war. In the end, I was not so fortunate to hear my father calling my name, because I was actually 9 months old when he left us. And 22 years later, neither myself nor my family know what happened to him after 29th of May 1999. We never found out what happened to him. And also, we don't know what happened to other 1,600 people, what happened to them after the Kosovo War. This personal story is part of a war, and for families and all those who do not know what happened to those missing persons, and all those who have, undergone sexual violence, and there have been 20,000 such persons. This is a tragedy for all of those and for all of us. Facing the past is not the same for every generation. My mother, sister, and brother who are older than me, it was much more difficult for them to handle the the fact that our father was missing, and they were. They had a different experience of the criminal acts performed by Serbian soldiers, but I was young at the time, and I didn't know about these at the time because I was so young, and now I have a different perspective on things than they do. And of course, I never really met my father, and I also approach the question of facing the past. I just wish to find out the truth of what happened to my father, and to have to be able to visit his grave every 29th of May. 2 decades have gone by that we have been waiting in Kosovo, and there's a lost hope. We might restore this hope, and sometimes it happens that we restore this hope whenever there's a new mass burial location find out, but every time we still do not find the remains of our father in those mass graves. I grew up having this missing father, and over 1,000 of young people and children in Kosovo were killed when they were so young. So it's a fact that we need to clearly understand that criminals need to be prosecuted, and we need to make a difference between who is the victim and who is the aggressor. There is a number of 1,600 people, missing persons, and we need to know who ordered the murders of many women, old people, and children in Kosovo, and we have to wait for justice, and we need to find out where our beloved ones are. But I see that in the public, there's always mentioning of this need for reconciliation between Kosovo and Serbia, but reconciliation needs peace. You have so many open wounds, and there can be no peace until you heal these wounds by means of justice. And justice can also maybe bring at later stage a reconciliation between ourselves. And I would like for it to be no more children who will be going through what we have gone through in Kosovo during war. Thank you. Thank you. The last two panelists are people who survived two different events. They have this. In one case, this was a deportation of Bosniak refugees from Montenegro in summer 1992, and the other one was kidnapping in Štrpci. Two separate events. And one of the most important things that Jaka mentioned here today is that reconciliation, and this is actually the first time I've heard such a thing, and it seems very, very accurate. Facing the past is not the same for each generation. We all have different expectations depending on who we were, what we were at the time this loss was incurred to us, how were our perspectives on the world around us, and how aware we were of what it was that we were losing at the time. And since she was a girl at the time, now I'd like to talk a little bit with Alan. Alan was 7 years old, if I remember correctly, when police showed up and took away his father. and he was never to be seen again by his son, and he's still actually, his father is still listed as a missing person. So I would like to hear from you. I mean, this might be a silly question, but what would be enough for you? What would be sufficient for you? Good day to all of you. I would like to thank the organizer for setting up this event. My name is Alan Bajrovic, a son of Osmo Bajrovic, who was taken by the police in May 1992 when he was, taken away from our family home, from our household. And this was Montenegrin police, the Herceg-Novi police, to be precise. And up until today, the official Montenegro never, ever told us where they took our father and where they killed him. The last known location was the Ministry of Interior's premises in Herceg-Novi. So this crime actually took place in state of Montenegro. I'm embittered at the system and institutions of Montenegro that never really took the courage to mustered up the courage to shed light on this crime. The prosecution never led investigation in this case. I'm embittered at the judiciary that's never really led to truth and justice in this case. I'm the overall prosecution and judiciary, and I'm embittered also at the Office for Missing Persons, because they don't even have a database on my father. We're not listed in the database, neither my father nor us as his family members. And also, I'm embittered at the municipality of Herceg-Novi and the local community that never allowed us as victims, as family, to build a monument that would mark this crime. Along with my father, around 100 or so people were taken away, and they're still missing persons. I'm so sad that Mr. Bramertz and Mrs. Oana are not here with us, but I will ask them this question now, and maybe they will go back to this panel. And the question for Mr. Bramertz would be, how did you allow for criminals to flee justice, and you did nothing to prosecute crimes in Montenegro? This crime, as well as other crimes. Also, a question for Mrs. Oana. Is this a part of Europe? And are these the rights that you are fighting for as Europe? I must emphasize that my greatest wish is to find the remains of my father. And also, I'm so sorry that Branka Bošnjak is not here with us so that I could ask her a question too, since, they all left and we as victims do not matter to them. So I would like also to ask her, what is the state of Montenegro going to do about this crime, and how are they going to fight to shed light on this crime and, bring back the remains to us as victims, so that we can, bury our beloved ones, so that I can, bury my father and be able to visit his grave. Because this is my greatest wish. I was only 5 years old when my father went missing, and from then on I was in a constant sense of agony, because nothing is being done to shed light on this crime. Of course, we still have proceedings against the state of Montenegro that we have instigated 15 years ago, and this is something that keeps reviving. There are constant trials and in hearings, and there is no will or desire to end this procedure. I'm currently really very emotionally affected, and hopefully you you can understand that, and hopefully you can relate to that. But there can be no reconciliation for as long as we, as victims, do not get a sort of satisfaction. And part of this satisfaction is for those who are culprits to be sentenced and prosecuted and sentenced. So what you do is you're actually creating bigger and bigger doubts amongst ourselves. We are becoming more and more suspicious of judiciary and prosecution, and you're actually creating this adverse effect in us because the state and Europe do not have the will or the desire to face these war crimes committed in Montenegro. Just a question, Alan, before you go on. So as far as I was informed, in this case, there has been an investigation and indictment was launched, but if I understood you correctly, they people who went missing were never actually people who were perpetrators were never really located. This trial was actually a farce, and it was completed by those suspects having been acquitted, and in fact they were awarded compensation for having to undergo trials and the time they have spent in remand prison. So we have no official, like court decisions or anything. So apart from this court procedure that you instigated against the state, do you have a communication with other institutions or state agencies? Neither the state nor any other agencies nor parts of the state apparatus have the will or desire to tell us anything as victims or to help us in any way. So the whole of state of Montenegro, as well as Europe, I have to emphasize that, have never given us any official data. Thank you. I mean, when I say okay, I don't literally mean okay, it's not okay, but thank you.
So Nail Kajvic is also somebody who survived a severe loss. And, because it's not the worst thing they can do to you is not to kill you yourself, but to take away your close ones. And this is what Nail had to go through. And it's a case that realistically has not been completed. So, and that has not been investigated, because when people talk about these topics, words, tend to change meaning, but the important thing is to send the right messages. So Nail, what is it that could bring peace to you? Switch on your mic, please. Well, it was train from Belgrade to Bar on the Strupci rail station in 1993 that 20 passengers were kidnapped, and the only thing you could blame them for were their personal names from the ID cards. This is how the kidnappers took them away from the train, including my brother at the age of 30. These were all the passengers who trusted the system, who trusted the state in which they lived. And what's even worse is the fact that they were all traveling in a state where there was no war. So they were kidnapped by the armed forces of Republic of Srpska, and the kidnapping was announced a month in advance because it was the chief of station in Užice who reported to his director for security that they are planning a kidnapping in Goleš station in Strupci. And on the next day, 9 directors of the railway, or everyone but General Director Minic, met and they understood how serious the situation was. On the next day, they had a meeting with the commander, George Keric, commander for the Užice region, and Boško Petric, and the information was confirmed as truthful. On the next day, all the directors met. The police officers met with the Security General Kuzmanovic and Ojdanic, and they told the railway people that the information is true, but that they will ask the armed forces of Republika Srpska not to do it in the border area, but to do it inside Bosnia and Herzegovina, deeper inside. The kidnapping took place from the 1st of February to the 3rd of February. They took 20 passengers from the train, they took them to the nearby school in Visegrad. They robbed them, they stole from them, they harassed them, and then they loaded them into trucks and took them to a nearby area in pairs and killed them in a garage of a burnt down house. We received all of this information in 2000 when the railway company at a trial against Nebojša Ranisavljević, one of the participants in Bila Polje, where we can say that the judge Vukoman Golubović, the judge of the High Court in Bila Polje, investigated this in detail, and it is thanks to our legal representatives, of course, that this event was shed light on. The way we knew about it anyway back from 1993, because the train was full of people with 1,000 passengers, and it was only in Prijepolje that 150 passengers left, so we had all the information, but the state envisaged this, through the principle of if there is no body, there is no crime. And Tanjug, for example, the Serbian media company, 2 days afterwards reported that 10 Serbs were taken away and 12 Muslims. And they also said that there were 2 black persons. One of those 20 passengers, as witnesses were saying, had a black skin, and the identity of the person could not be established. But for the other passengers, the identity was established, and findings were found of 4 persons. First of all, the head was found from Alel Zubčević, a refugee from Trebinje, who was going to, he was a refugee to Rožaj, and then he went to Scandinavian countries, but they returned him from the Hungarian border, and he was going back with a wife and 2 minor children. Later on, when they removed water from Peručac Lake, they found 3 more, the death remainings from 3 more persons, Rastodar Ćorić and Lučina. And as for the others, they could probably find more death remainings, but during the reconstruction, they tried to do it as soon as possible. They were afraid that the dam would collapse, and they did promise that they would do it some other time, but they never did it. So the death remainings of those persons ended up in such a way that the kidnappers, Boban Lukic and Učić and the others, the groups received track from the Quarantine Brigade, and the weapons commanded by Damir Mitrošinović, who spent a month before that being recommended from Belgrade to form the Gorazde Brigade, and then Luka Dragicević, Lieutenant Colonel, who is now standing trial in Sarajevo, who knew, because they were the regular armed forces, it wasn't, the kidnapping was not as they wanted to depict it. The kidnapping was not committed by some unformed or by some illegal group. It was a planned action designed in the cabinets in Belgrade and perpetrated by the armed forces of Republika Srpska Saudi, because all the officers were commanded by the armed forces of former Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, General Perišić. What we managed to do in the past period until the final and enforceable decision where Neboj Šarani-Savljević, one of the participants, was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and he served his sentence in the meantime. We managed to have a procedure be launched against 10 persons who are standing trial in Sarajevo, and 5 persons are standing trial in Belgrade. Now, when we talk about trials and perpetrators, I agree with what's been said by my predecessors, that the courts and the prosecution offices are investing efforts. So I'm pleased with the trial in Bila Polje, where the judge, again, Vukoman Golubović, did a great job and a professional job. I'm partly also pleased with the prosecution office in Belgrade, but I'm not pleased with the trial in Sarajevo, because the process is only for commanding accountability and liability, and it's taking a very long time with different excuses found so to linger the trial. But you know, if it's not completed in 5 years, then you will have less and less witnesses, and it will be more difficult to reach the truth. So the worst thing is that only the direct perpetrators are standing trial. Those people who were young at the time, who were inexperienced, but what hurts and insults us as the families is that a political climate is being created as if all of those war criminals were depicted and are depicted as national heroes in the parliament, in the television channels, and there is no political climate to lead the process to completion. Again, the governments have changed and the presidents have changed, and we had democratic and different, but democratic changes, but nobody actually showed willingness to create a normal atmosphere in which those war criminals would be labeled as they deserve to be labeled. And another unfortunate thing is that the families have tried to get the status of the civil victims of the war, but we never managed to receive such status because there is no hostile armed forces, as if a friendly armed forces did it. A question for you, Nail. So obviously we are talking about 3 events here, 3 incidents, if you wish, and what's joint, what's common to all of them is that the state, that the crimes were committed by the state, and that the state has managed to distance itself from the perpetrators, from the people who committed these crimes on behalf of the state. This was not, private initiative. And the war crimes, were not committed out of private initiative. So how do you feel about it? Because you live in this state that does its best to distance itself. And at the same time, those people who did it are declared heroes. As I was saying, the crime was planned in such a way that they thought no bodies would be found and then there would be no crime. And the state did its best, to buy time. We knew that it was the state who did it, because again, 150 passengers left the train in Prijepolje. We all had the information, all the families from Montenegro and from Serbia, with President Josic, and he told us that the conclusion would be that he has a meeting with Dalia, and that he promised that he would discuss it with him, but basically nothing happened. We met with President Milosevic 4 times. We would spend we actually one time spent 38 days in Belgrade with a view to getting the information, but they already had all the information, and if they wanted to do so, they did have the possibility. The armed forces of Yugoslavia was superior to the armed forces of the Republic of Srpska. We knew that, but we also knew that it was only the state that could help us to at least find the remainings of our beloved ones, and so that we find peace, and that we know the place where we can visit our late ones. But unfortunately, again, Milosevic received us, with great, in a cordial manner. Natasha Kandic was there, and Bilo Grlic from Naša Borba, and all the journalists, all the press was there. The security guards were confused because we all went in together, but after that, there were no such occasions. And Natasha Kandic was sitting next to me, and she was telling us, well, he promised you everything, and I was saying he is lying. Everything he says is a lie, because this was such a person. He can, look you in the eyes and lie with no problems, in such a convincing manner that you believe him. He was so persuasive psychologically, even though we knew he was lying. Well, I do know myself something, Niall, about this. I had a chance to see him for 2.5 years, so I know how skillful Slobodan Milosevic was in lying. So I understand you. Unfortunately, we will have to bring this session to a conclusion, but the only conclusion, we heard from 4 people, 3 of them are with us. The only conclusion is that for 30 years now, for 25, 6 years after that, we are talking in such a way that the definition of success is for many people to find just a small piece or a bone and to bury it as the remainings of people should be buried. And this is actually the biggest defeat of all of us. If we lived in a society that shared the values with those 3 people sitting here next to me, then it would be much better. And this way, this is not the case. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. And we'll meet again, I hope, on some other occasion. We are waiting for one more person to join us. We are quite late with the agenda and behind the agenda, so we will start immediately this third panel, which is related to the role of NGOs in the process of facing the past and reaching transitional justice. So with us today, we had Bekim Blackaj, the director of the Humanitarian Law Center from Kosovo. Bekim had a dilemma in which language he would talk, but we eventually decided that he can talk the local language here, so that it's easier for logistics and for all the other reasons for direct communication with the audience. So Bekim, ever since the start of your center, you worked a lot on the documentation and archiving the materials related to war crimes. So have these materials been used in judicial proceedings, and how important was your role in facing the past in the territory of Kosovo? And another question is, if we have enough time, how much is Kosovo's society and community willing and ready to face the past? Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot, Dina. Thanks to Mr. Radovic also for inviting me. It's very important for me that I'm here with you today. And as for your question, the Humanitarian Law Center in Kosovo and in Serbia are implementing several joint projects. And the most important project is the Kosovo Book of Memories. So within the project, we registered with full personal details 13,335 people who were killed or went missing in the period from 1st of January 1998 to 31st of December 2000 in Kosovo. So we covered the post-war period as well, where unfortunately we also had many crimes. And now we are in the process of documenting this. So what does it mean? We received the first data on the victims, but it is not our goal only to have a list. We already have a list. Our goal is to collect data on the circumstances in which these people lost their lives. So we formed a database, which is rather complete now, and with a simple search, this database allows to have documentation in where the victims is mentioned. So whether it is primary source of information, such as the statements by the witnesses and victims, or in other ways. And also there is the court documents, there is secondary documentation or sources. These are different types of video recordings from the media, text from the media, reports by other NGOs, etc. It is our goal, of course. It wasn't our goal just to document, but to investigate wherever this was possible. We wanted to collect such information, but we did not strive to investigate ourselves. We wanted to collect such information, and our goal was to document the victims so that they do not get forgotten, and more importantly, so that accurate records are made with accurate information about the victims, so that we prevent the victims from being manipulated, because unfortunately initially we had denial of the victims and denial of the crimes, and on the other hand, we had attempts by different individuals to increase the numbers, etc., of victims. So it was our goal to document the victims, not to investigate the perpetrators. So of course, the documents were used sometimes for court purposes, although we did have a large number of cases where the prosecution office and Madam Prosecutor today mentioned the UNMIC mission and especially EULEX mission. So prosecutors very oftentimes approached us requesting documents. So these were mainly contacts with survivors or their family members. But when it comes to this same document, so this database, it's been used much more by our partners, the humanitarian law front from Serbia, which filed more than 10 criminal charges against the perpetrators using the documents. So wherever we had collected sufficient information about the perpetrators of some crimes, this was used to prepare those criminal charges and reports. Even in some cases, indictments were brought. And actually, imprisonment sentences were imposed. So I can say that this database was used and for the purpose of prosecuting those who committed such crimes. As for your second question, unfortunately, Kosovo, the situation in Kosovo is not much different from that in the other countries of the region. So the process of facing the past is not flowing the way it should. I do not, of course, wish to interfere in the criminal justice. We are reporting from those trials, etc. But of course, we are not pleased at all with the number of cases, and we are not pleased with the verdicts and the number of perpetrators convicted out of all of the courts prosecuting war crimes committed in Kosovo, starting with the former Hague Tribunal and the special war crimes panel in Serbia and the court in Kosovo. Less than 70 persons were convicted finally for war crimes in Kosovo. And as I was saying, there's more than 13,000 killed and missing persons. Most of them, 10,800 were civilians. So these are direct victims of the war crimes or crimes against humanity. But what I wish to say is that very little has been done by the institutions to create the right narrative about the past. And the situation is the same in other countries as well. A couple of years ago, we did an analysis of the history textbooks from Kosovo and Serbia, and the information in those textbooks coincide that it's in such a level that it's amazing, you know. So what I'm trying to say is that this message is sent, which is not true. And younger generations are raised with such messages. And of course, the political situation also has an influence. So the fact that Serbia doesn't recognize Kosovo, this also is a problem and has a detrimental effect, and these messages also create problems. But the civil society actually took this on its own shoulders, the effort to create the right messages. I told you already that our organization, together with the Fund from Serbia, documents all the missing and killed persons, and there are many other organizations also registering other violations of human rights during the wars, and of course, including the crimes such as the sexual abuse, etc. So the civil society has implemented many activities, but we cannot do much without the institutions of the system, even through the proactive role in creating this common recording of the past and being aware of the time. I will finish by saying and by congratulating for creating the documentation center. First of all, the most serious initiative for documenting were also done by civil society in Kosovo, and this is very important. This is really very important. Thank you, Becky. The data you shared with us and the figures tell us how much the humanitarian law fund in Serbia and in Kosovo was important in this process. And of course, as for the messages that are being sent, in Montenegro, the younger generations are also raised through these isolated messages and family and personal ones. So the situation is the same with us. We also have Marco from the initiative for YIHR from Serbia. So I know that they had youth exchange between Serbia and Kosovo. This is something that that made them recognizable when it comes to the initiative, but it never stopped there. The initiative also worked for years with other countries of the region, and with a special focus on Kosovo. So Marco, tell us, how do young people in Serbia today see their war past, and how do they get informed? Thank you, Dina, and thank you for inviting us to be here at this event. It's important that we have a chance to hear today from Prosecutor Bramertz and from representatives of the state of Montenegro, which is not so common opportunity in the events in the region. So it's important. It's a broad question, but I will try to somehow respond constructively, because this is how I see the task of the Youth Initiative of Human Rights. So it's a regional network, not only organization coming from Serbia, but also a regional network. And for 17 years now, and as somebody who actually translates the verdicts, the judgments, translating them into social knowledge and information, so that based on that knowledge and information, one could have an argumentative discussion about the past where no memories will be suppressed or ignored. What we have today as a result, and I was joking actually with a couple of participants, it's such a fact that I grew up myself in the meantime, and things have regressed instead of progressing. When we talk about education in the field of war crimes, and when we talk about the trials for war crimes, so there are couple of surveys of public opinion polls from 2017 and 2020, where the numbers, the figure is actually not important, but what they send as a message is that when young people lack institutional education in their high schools or at faculties, and when the curricula are not in line with or do not coincide at all with the judgments of the war crime tribunals and courts, then this is a problem. And on the other hand, you have the most blatant and direct denial of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and especially of genocide in Serbia and in Srebrenica. So in this case, the micro communities create their messages and narratives, and it depends on the community what the message will be like. But most frequently, it's a very negative message when it comes to empathy towards the victims of war crimes. And what we have as a situation in Serbia now, we have the graffiti and the murals which celebrate Ratko Mladic, but there is simply not enough space to talk about empathy for the victims of the great number of crimes that were now proven also through the second instance decision. But what can be done in this space, I think this is the important question. So that what we did last year, we created a website as an investigative platform for those who wish to know what happened in the territory of Serbia in relation to the breakdown of Yugoslavia and war crimes. So this website, warinserbia.rs or ratoserbia.rs, it is a tool for all the investigators and young people who wish to learn that war crimes happened in other places as well, such as in Serbia. One of the biggest mass graves is in the immediate vicinity of Belgrade. So this is and the place is still a shooting place for training one of the special units of the Ministry of Interior of Serbia, and it is not designated in any manner. So when you put these things together, the results are not good and they are negative. But what I see as a task of us as the regional network is that the facing process is expanded and placed on two parallel lines. One of them is national, but it should not stop there. And when we talk about the glorification of the war criminals, which is the worst possible trend that we could see today while talking to the victims, that this is what bothers them the most. So we should consider the Yugoslavia territory as our yard, and not only our countries on behalf of which we speak here. So we should in a parallel focus on the criticism which will be common when it comes to the civil society organizations, with special focus on recognition of the victims, because this is where we are struggling the most to talk about that. And on the other hand, to insist on institutional and political responsibility and accountability of the countries. This is something we are talking about not only since the second instance verdict in the case of Mladic, but also in other cases. We previously reflected on the Stropci kidnapping. So these are the cases where the state intentionally creates a confusion around individual and collective responsibility and accountability. And these are the cases where, impunity appears for a whole chain that stood behind the crime. And very rarely will those individuals be sanctioned that actually instigated and ordered and led to such crimes being committed. And of course, this is still alive, and this is why today we are talking about what we are talking about. And the focus in this regard should be transferred to education, because the states of the region are closing the doors slowly. And this still needs to be the task of the civil society organizations and different academic institutions and individuals who wish to join this fight. And which should give hope for the victims and for the society that there is an alternative, because without that hope, we cannot talk about facing the past, regardless of how negative the results are. So, and I will finish by saying it's very important here to address this as a generational response to facing the past. We should talk about this from the inside up to see how these new generations born after 1995 or 1999 approach these things, and they need to get involved through these exchange programs and also through these events and conferences. So that's it.
Thank you, Marco. Retrograde politics is present. We're all aware of that in the region, but your persistence in bringing back this topic into the focus is something to be praised, to say the least. So we're moving on because we really don't have much time left. So we'll move on and we'll hear from Neira. And when I was reading a bit about Neira, I see that she's trying to tackle this topic in a different way. So I would like, Neira, for you to tell us what it is that you do and how is it that you're trying to make this topic, a bit more, a bit closer to people. Thank you for the invitation. Good day to all of you. And I would like to thank the organizers and to the previous panelists and, representatives of victims who were here at the previous panel and shared their stories with us. I think it's so important for all of us to hear this. And I can tell you that within the Bern network and the Balkan Transitional Justice, which is a regional program, we have been, for the most part, dealing with, the search for truth and telling the truth. So Bern, whenever they produce a story, they do it through 3 segments. So the first one is fact-checking, this impartial approach to storytelling. The second one is giving platform to victims and give platform for public debate. And the third segment is finding a constructive way for telling a story, finding a different way for telling a story. My long-term research is also based on using of visual arts and memorialization in transitional justice, and how trauma is actually passed on from one generation to another generation of victims. And I think the 2 most important things are here. The first is to give voice to victims so that they can share their stories. And the second one is to have historical records of these stories, to make records of these stories. And this is what Mr. Beckham has been mentioning. There are so many institutions involved in creating these archives and collection of documentation. And the way these archives and these documentation can be presented differently to the audience is through museums, through art. One of the major institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina that is tackling this is the Memorial Center in Srebrenica. They have a very important role, and also they are active amongst community on a daily basis. So it's not like they are their own purpose in a way. Because after all these years, I believe transitional justice is getting this performance sort of role in a society, and it should be otherwise. It should approach victims holistically, so that victims would have a holistic approach, and people working with victims would have a holistic approach. So since we don't have a lot of time, I'm just trying to briefly mention certain things. But another important aspect of transitional justice is people dealing with transitional justice, their personal sense of trauma, and how they, in their line of work, are actually handling the material that is traumatic in itself. I not sure whether there's anyone in the region, tackling these things, like workers in this memorial museums, or people working in prosecution, people working in the field, people working with the Institute for Missing Persons. How do these workers, these employees in these entities, how are they handling their work? This is another important topic, and I can tell you that the majority of these people, including us here, have gone through a traumatic experience of sort, because without that, we wouldn't be able to even understand the experience of these victims. So another important thing that I need to mention is that Bern, within the Balkan Transitional Justice Program, has been trying for over a decade, decades, has been trying to have a new step in terms of transition justice. So to that end, this year we started implementing the project, which is called Reporter's House. That's the working title. So this is like a museum space that will be open next year in Sarajevo, and it will testify to the breakup of Yugoslavia through media reports and through journalistic experience in this work. And through this project, we will try to compile the documentations that have been collected by both Bern and NGOs in the region, to collate it and to present it to the audience, to those people who will be coming as tourists to Sarajevo as well, so to the wider audience. And we will also try to present this kind of topic through visual arts and through contemporary approach to interpreting war crimes in former Yugoslavia. Thank you so much. It is your different take on this topic that's so important, I believe, because it is important to approach victims and wider audience, wider public in different ways. It's not that every person can experience this topic in the same way. So maybe through museums, through arts, we might be sending conveying this message to wider public in an easier, more straightforward way. And surely this is like a contribution to the long-term cultural heritage. Thank you so much. Vesna, good day. Hopefully you can hear us. I can hear you very well. Welcome to this event virtually. I presume that people working in the NGO sector are well aware of who you are. You have been a long-term activist of Documenta from Croatia. And what are your experiences as an NGO activist when it comes to facing the past after Croatia has become an EU member? Has something changed in that respect? And what is the contribution of an NGO sector or civil sector when we talk about the topic of reconciliation? First of all, thank you for the invitation, and my apologies for attending only in this online sort of manner. And after joining the EU, well, the first thing I would like to mention is that proceedings for war crimes have been stagnating in Croatia. Our audience, our public, and victims really expect a great deal from court proceedings, whether it's a tribunal or International Court of Justice, or maybe domestic Croatian, Montenegrin, Bosnian, and Kosovo courts, and Macedonian courts as well. And so year in, year out, these trials for war crimes have been revolving from anywhere between 30 and 40 cases per year. And this has been the case since Croatia joined the EU. And we have this ever surprising problem. There are these trials done in absentia, although perpetrators or defendants would be available if these cases were handled by other cases, like other countries like Serbia, Kosovo, and so on. And defendants are at times not available, but still the prosecutors want to give the opportunity to witnesses to take part in the proceedings. We have mixed feelings about that because the very process of the whole society when it comes to facing the past is in some segments, quite advanced. In some segments, it's stagnating or regressing. This is basically, there is a negative heritage of the entire 20th century, and we've made a documentary film, and we have over 500 recorded video interviews, and over 200 of them are available in our language, and we have them in English language as well through our platform. And also we have been documenting the destinies of those murdered, and so far we have written down the circumstances of killings for over 12,000 person who have been either killed or missing in the 91 to 95 war in Croatia. This is an ongoing research, and we have been publishing data gradually. And we have a great regional communication with, in cooperation with the Fund for Humanitarian Right from Belgrade, and the same fund from Kosovo. This research is something that hasn't been done by the government and scientific institutions. We keep asking them to publish their data that they have come up with, but this is not happening. We have been collecting documents that are to a great part actually based on field research, because through field research we have actually recorded over 7,200 interviews with victims and witnesses, because they are the focus of facing the past and the focus of our work. And the data that would be directly drawn from birth registries and death registries, they are not published. So we have a paradoxical situation. We are an EU member, and as such, we still have a situation where government and scientific institutions have not really published data regarding witnesses, and our data would actually be complementary to those potential data that we might potentially receive. They would actually together shed light on facts of different crimes, on people who were murdered or went missing. I would like to draw attention to the culture of memory, and cultural memory is sometimes culture of remembrance, and sometimes it's a culture of oblivion, of forgetfulness, and we're far away from the motto that we have been using, people remember people, and we have been using it in a joint initiative for RECOM. And even today in the Reconciliation Network, we are still collecting information about those murdered and missing, because government and scientific institutions are not doing everything they can to make sure that people remember people, so that we can humanize this perspective towards people who were killed, and also humanize our mutual relations of one towards another. And it's important for everything that we do, that it's based on fact, whether these are facts stemming from court proceedings, and of course those kinds of facts determined before the court are those that are mostly trusted by the public, or maybe whether those are facts determined in the scope of activities of civil society organizations. And also in this documentation we cover World War II and political violence during Yugoslav socialism, and also we have modernization on one part, and on the other hand we have the heritage of these murders after World War II, or political violence that took place in camps, prisoners camps such as Goli Otok. So the greatest part of this heritage has to do with the 90s, but I wouldn't neglect of the under-acknowledged suffering of a Holocaust, genocide against Roma, genocide against Serbs, because in these months and years, we will keep track of what will happen with the initiative for the forbidding of the Ustasha regime symbols of the so-called independent state of Croatia, NDH. And the government is not ready actually to confirm this prohibition of use of such symbols. So I want to say that in EU members facing the past is still not a quick or an easy process, and we are facing similar difficulties as member states. Thank you, Vesna. We don't really have this encouraging news from Croatia in this respect, but what's important for us is that you as an EU member share with us these experiences, because I believe that we will hopefully, all of us soon, will be a part of the same team. I believe that there are questions, so you may use the opportunity to seize the moment, so to say. Maybe we can, cater for 2 or 3 questions, if I may. Good day. I will be brief. I need to. Bakira Hasacic was a speaker at the previous panel, and she asked me to ask a question or give a comment because she didn't have enough time to give a comment to the Mr. Kavic's comment. So I will read it on her behalf because she has a technical issue with reconnecting to the meeting. This is basically her urging Serbia and Mr. Vučić, President Vučić, to once again search the Peručac lake for many reasons, because 800 Bosniaks were not found in Visegrad, and there are other municipalities with a significant number of missing persons. And what they have at this time is that a lot of persons killed were actually thrown into the Drina River. So she's actually urging the Republic of Serbia to make this happen, to allow for this to happen. And of course, all regional countries should help as much as they can to victims, to families of victims and association dealing with victims, to help these people find the remains of their beloved ones so that they could have this sort of satisfaction. And of course, prosecution is needed as well. But for at least, I just wanted to refer to this urging made by Mrs. Bakira. Any more questions? Okay, so we may wrap up, but if there's anything else you want to add, feel free. I would just like to add to what Mrs. Bakira mentioned for missing persons. I believe Emir Suljevic said at the previous panel that the only current satisfaction for victims is to find the remains of their beloved ones, or at least part of those remains. And Bern has been working on this database of mass graves in ex-Yugoslavia for the past year. And before the final judgment that was pronounced to Ratko Mladic, that's when we launched this base. And in the previous year, we have visited around 60 locations, for the most part in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and 2 in Croatia, and 1 in Batajnica. And during this field work, we have encountered met a lot of people living in the vicinity of these mass graves, and people who are still looking for their missing loved ones. And in Visegrad, there's a very specific situation, because Visegrad is one of cities where I can say most brutal crimes in ex-Yugoslavia. That's where they took place, and mostly women and children were killed there. And Drina is believed to be one of the largest mass graves in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Drina River. So what she mentioned is so important, because a lot of people are still gone missing, especially from that particular part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I also have a question This will not be a question aimed directly to any of you. Whoever wants to give a response may do so. I presume that you're all aware of the existence of these tensions, both ethnic and national issues in Montenegro and in region, which has been ever present lately. So maybe some of you can give a comment. How do you perceive this whole situation? And do you think that we will be moving to, relieving these tensions, or are they going to be aggravated in the time to come? What do you think? Thank you. Speaking in general terms, I really don't know the situation as such. I try to get to say as informed about the situation in Montenegro and other regional countries, but I don't know the current situation fully and what is it that causes these tensions. But I'm totally sure about what is causing tensions between Kosovo and Serbia. Apart from this political problem, and I believe I've mentioned it already today, those narratives that are developing and which are even supported by representatives of institutions. This is a very dangerous thing. Younger generations are growing with these sort of one-sided, biased narratives. Then they're creating prejudice towards those others. The very fact that that victims of all parties on all sides are not being recognized. Everyone is standing to their own victims, and they're trying to, deny that there are victims on the other side. And somebody has mentioned out of the panelists that this ethnical distance is growing bigger and bigger. And of course, this is not something that's giving us hope so as towards achieving this sustainable reconciliation in the near future. And we've heard the previous panel. What else can you say after this panel? Really, they have the right to justice and to truth, and if we as a society keep avoiding this, and especially institutions of the system in all of the countries of the region, then we cannot possibly expect anything positive from the future. I'll just be brief. My impression, if we're talking about the resolution on the Srebrenica genocide, is that this is now seen as this sort of end of discussion about a genocide and war crimes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I believe this should actually be the start. These tensions that are on the rise, they're actually talking about the confrontation between two nationalisms and which of the nationalisms is going to, have supremacy in the government, either the Serbian one or the Montenegrin one. And this is what's going to be causing tensions. But I think that this resolution was used in a wrong manner, and this resolution should actually be something that's a fundamental thing. And hopefully, Montenegrin society will have the strength to serve to use this resolution as the grounds, as the base to move towards to move forward with investigating those cases that haven't been investigated thus far. Vesna, were you going to say something? Yes. If there are no other comments, I would like to say that it is so important to keep supporting victims and survivors through commemoration, through documentation, investigation, research, memorial centers and interventions, and to do this jointly. I would like to to congratulate you on opening of the IDC Center, Documentation Center, because it will just contribute not just to non-formal education programs. I believe this will also be instilled in the formal curricula. And this is something that's done by the Human Rights Action and Center for Civic Education and other NGOs that are Podgorica based. But it's important to keep insisting on development of new programs and organize seminars and new contents for teachers, and to also set up all of these digital platforms. And this is what we do, but we should not give up, because facing the past is about acknowledging the suffering of all of the victims. And this is the basic component of societal and also economic growth. Government institutions sometimes do realize this, but sometimes they do not. But this is something that shouldn't be preventing us from keep working and advocating for this reconciliation with the past. And I believe that this documentation center, IDC center, is something that will serve to keep working in this direction. Before we close, and thank you, Vesna, I would like to once again thank the victims who mustered up the courage to relive their traumas and to share their testimonies with us. This is surely not an easy thing, but this is so important for us coming from the NGO sector who actually are spurred by such things to keep working. And also it's important for the institutions, their representatives, to be able to hear these stories. Thank you to panelists. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.